A flower girl brought roses to the wrong house, and a mafia boss answered the door. A fine mist hung in the air, carrying the scent of wet stone, flowers, and distant smoke from the chimneys. Alara wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders, her basket of roses swaying gently with each step. She had walked these streets hundreds of times, her feet memorizing every crack in the stones, every shadow in the alleys, and every faint sound of life behind closed doors. Alara was a flower girl, small and unassuming, with chestnut hair that fell in loose waves and eyes that carried a quiet intelligence. She knew the city like a secret poem, reading its moods in the faces she passed and the way the wind moved. Today she had a special delivery, a bouquet of crimson roses tied with a gold ribbon. The note attached was simple, "To the one who makes my days brighter." She didn't know who would receive the roses, only that she must deliver them with care. As she walked, the rain began to fall more steadily, making her tiny basket heavier. Her shoes were soaked, and the smell of wet roses mixed with the mist. Ahead, a mansion loomed, a tall, imposing structure of dark stone and iron gates, its windows glowing faintly like distant stars. It was the address the client had given her. She paused, trying to remember if this was truly the right place. The street numbers were confusing, and the rain blurred the ink on the letter. Still, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. She lifted the iron knocker and rapped gently on the door. The sound echoed through the empty hall behind it, and a moment later it opened. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat that seemed to absorb the light. His hair was black as midnight, slicked back neatly, and his eyes were colder than the rain outside. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just looked at her. Alara's heart skipped a beat. Something in his presence made her stomach tighten, a mixture of danger and curiosity she had never felt before. She clutched the basket closer to her chest, holding the roses like a shield. I have flowers for," she began, her voice small, almost swallowed by the rain. The man tilted his head slightly, regarding her with a gaze that felt like it could see right through her. There was silence for a long moment, filled only by the sound of rain tapping against the door. "You're at the wrong house," he said finally, his voice deep, smooth, and slightly dangerous, like velvet hiding steel. Alara's cheeks flushed. I'm sorry. I think I made a mistake." She started to turn, embarrassed and nervous, but something in his stance held her in place. "Wait," he said, and though he didn't move closer, his eyes seemed to pull her in. "Why do you deliver flowers to strangers, to people you don't know?" Alara hesitated. She wasn't used to being questioned by anyone, least of all by someone who seemed as formidable as this man. It's my work. People pay me to bring flowers and messages. Sometimes it makes them happy." She looked down at the roses in her basket. "And maybe it makes me happy too." He studied her for a long time, and for the first time he spoke in a softer tone, almost curious rather than commanding. "Happiness, that's fragile. Do you understand that?" Alara lifted her eyes to meet his. "I think I do. But I also think happiness is worth trying for, even if it's fragile." A faint trace of a smile appeared at the corner of his lips, almost imperceptible. The man's name was Lucian, and though she didn't know it yet, he was feared in the city for reasons most people wouldn't dare to speak aloud. His hands had held power and destruction, but there was a loneliness in his gaze now that no one had ever seen before. For reasons she couldn't explain, Alara didn't feel afraid of him. She felt curious. A strange warmth brushed against her chest as she studied the sharp lines of his face, the quiet intensity in his eyes, and the aura of someone who had lived too long in shadows. Lucian broke the silence. "You have courage to come here alone. Most would have run at the sight of this house." Alara blushed, shifting the basket slightly. "I'm not afraid," she said softly, though her heart raced. Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a connection neither could name. It was dangerous, magnetic, and impossible to ignore. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets in silver light, as though the city itself was holding its breath. "I don't usually accept visitors," Lucian said after a pause, "but you are different." Alara's brow furrowed slightly. "Different how?" "Different," he repeated, his voice low and thoughtful, "because you carry life in your hands. Most people carry lies or fear. You carry life and you are not afraid." She felt a shiver run down her spine. She wanted to step back, to leave, but something in her heart told her to stay. "I thank you," she whispered. Lucian moved aside slightly, gesturing to the dark hall behind him. "Then come in. Just for a moment, I am curious now. There is something about you." Alara hesitated, the cold rain soaking through her shoes, but the warmth of the hall called to her. She stepped inside, the door closing softly behind her. The air was warm and smelled faintly of sandalwood and old books, a strange contrast to the chill outside. The hall was vast, with tall ceilings and portraits that seemed to watch her every move. Shadows clung to the corners, moving slightly as if alive. Alara felt her pulse quicken, not with fear but with awe. This house was more than a home. It was a world of its own, filled with mystery and power. Lucian watched her carefully, noting the way her eyes roamed the room, the way she handled the roses, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity. He said nothing for a long time, letting the silence speak between them. Finally, he spoke. "Why do you carry roses? Why this color?" Alara looked down at the crimson petals, so bright against the dim hall. "Red, it means love, passion, life. I think everyone needs a reminder of those things, even in the darkest times." Lucian's gaze softened just a fraction at her words. "Even in the darkest times," he repeated. He took a step closer, and for a moment she could feel the heat of his presence, the strength behind him, and the weight of his solitude. The moment was broken by a sound outside, a distant shout, the rattle of a carriage, the wind tugging at the gates. But for a heartbeat, the world outside ceased to matter. Alara and Lucian were alone, two strangers connected by something neither of them could name. Alara set the basket on a small table near the door, the roses spilling slightly over the edge. "I should go," she said softly, trying to regain her composure. "I have more deliveries." Lucian's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with a possessive intensity she didn't understand. "No, not yet, sit, just for a moment." She hesitated, then obeyed. The chair was large and carved from dark wood, almost throne-like, and she felt small and fragile as she lowered herself into it. Lucian leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "You are brave," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper, "and foolish. Perhaps the two are the same." Alara looked up, meeting his eyes. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but sometimes the brave ones see more clearly than the cautious. Sometimes the brave ones can see what others cannot." Lucian's expression shifted, and for a brief moment he looked almost human, vulnerable, curious. And then just as quickly, the shadow of the world he carried returned, the darkness that had kept him feared and alone. "You are not like the others," he murmured. "Most people, they lie, they hide, they betray, but you are honest, and for that I do not yet know what to do with you." Alara felt her heart tighten. She did not understand what he meant, but she felt the weight of it, the gravity, the danger, the power. She felt drawn to him, even as every instinct in her body whispered caution. The rain outside began to lessen, the city bathed in a soft silver light as the night deepened. Alara rose to leave, picking up the basket of roses. Lucian stopped her with a voice low and compelling. "Roses do not come to my door by accident." Alara froze. Her hand hovered over the basket. "You were meant to find me," he said, his eyes dark, intense and impossible to read. Her chest tightened, her mind a storm of questions and emotions. She nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak, and stepped out into the rain once more. As she walked away, her heart raced. She could not stop thinking about the man in the mansion, the darkness he carried, the loneliness she glimpsed in his eyes, the strange pull that drew her toward him. Something had begun tonight, something dangerous and beautiful, something that neither she nor Lucian could deny. And somewhere behind her, in the silent, shadowed halls of the mansion, Lucian watched her disappear into the mist, his mind as restless and haunted as the night itself. The city never truly slept. Its streets breathed with life, danger, and whispers that slipped between the shadows. Alara walked briskly through the narrow alleys, the evening mist curling around her like soft fingers. Her basket of roses was lighter tonight, though her mind carried a heavier weight. Thoughts of the man from the mansion followed her like a shadow she could not escape. Lucian's face lingered in her memory. His eyes, dark and unreadable, seemed to pierce through her very soul. And yet, beneath the sharp edges of his presence, she had sensed something fragile, almost human. It was strange how a single encounter could shake a person so deeply. She did not understand why, but a part of her wanted to see him again. Alara's work required her to deliver flowers across the city, and though most nights were ordinary, tonight felt different. Every street corner, every lamplit alley seemed alive with possibility and danger. She wondered what it would be like to walk into that mansion again, to face the man who had unsettled her so completely. Meanwhile, Lucian sat in the darkened study of his mansion, staring at the empty hallway where she had disappeared. He could not stop thinking about her. Most people who came to his doorstep were afraid, trembling under the weight of his reputation. But she had walked in with quiet courage, unafraid and curious. That alone made her different, remarkable even. Yet Lucian's life was not made for ordinary human connections. There were dangers in his world, shadows that lurked at every corner, enemies who would use any weakness against him. And still, the thought of her lingered, persistent and disquieting. Something about her, her innocence, her determination, her way of seeing the world, awoke a part of him he had long buried beneath power and fear. Days passed, but Alara could not shake the memory of his gaze. She found herself walking past the mansion more than once, careful to stay out of sight. She did not know why, but the pull was irresistible. Her hands shook slightly as she carried her flowers, her mind filled with questions she dared not speak aloud. Who was he? Why did she feel drawn to him? Lucian, aware of the quiet stirrings of curiosity in her, had begun to leave subtle signs for her. A window left slightly open, a faint light in the hall, a soft melody drifting through the air. He did not speak, did not call, but he left breadcrumbs, small, careful invitations into his world. The first true encounter after that night came unexpectedly. Alara had stopped at the corner of a narrow street to rest, adjusting the ribbon on her basket. She had just finished delivering a bouquet to a merchant's wife when she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw him, Lucian, emerging from the shadows as if the night itself had moved him closer. "You are persistent," he said, his voice calm but edged with amusement. "Most people would avoid me." I wasn't avoiding you," she admitted, her cheeks flushing. "I just wasn't sure if I should come." Lucian stepped closer, the mist curling around him like smoke. "Curiosity is dangerous, Alara. You should know that by now." She smiled faintly, almost defiantly. "Sometimes curiosity is the only thing that keeps life interesting." A moment passed, quiet and charged with tension. He studied her carefully, noting the way she held herself, the gentle strength in her posture, the courage in her gaze. For a man used to power and control, it was unsettling to encounter someone who seemed untouched by fear. "You carry life in your hands," Lucian said finally, pointing to the basket of roses. "Do you understand how rare that is?" Alara tilted her head, considering him. I think so. Life is delicate and beauty is fleeting. That's why I bring flowers. To remind people, to remind myself." Lucian's eyes softened, though only slightly. There was something almost human in that gaze, a shadow of the man beneath the power. "Few see the truth in such things," he murmured. "Most are blind to beauty and fragility." Alara's heart quickened. She felt a strange connection forming, invisible yet undeniable. She wanted to reach out, to touch the shadowed layers of his life, to understand the loneliness that clung to him like a second skin. Yet she also knew that this world was dangerous. One wrong move and she could be caught in the darkness that surrounded him. "I think I want to see the truth," she said softly, "even if it's scary." Lucian's expression darkened for a brief moment. "The truth is not gentle," he said. "It is sharp and it leaves scars." "Are you prepared for that?" I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I think some truths are worth the risk." He regarded her in silence, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps. Then you shall see, but do not think it will be easy." Over the next few days, Alara found herself drawn deeper into Lucian's world. She delivered flowers to other clients, yes, but she began to notice patterns, small details that led her back to the mansion. She began leaving notes for him in places she thought he might see, small messages tied to a single rose, curious phrases she hoped would spark recognition. Lucian, for his part, watched from the shadows. He did not show himself often, but he followed her movements with careful attention, analyzing her courage, her honesty, and the light in her that had long been absent from his life. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he allowed himself to feel something new, something fragile and dangerous. One night, when the moon hung high and silver over the city, a sudden incident forced them together more closely than either expected. As Alara crossed a quiet street with her basket of flowers, a carriage veered out of control, the horses startled and panicked. She froze, unable to move fast enough to avoid the danger. Lucian appeared like a shadow, moving with supernatural speed. In an instant, he grabbed her arm and pulled her out of harm's way, his eyes blazing with concern. The basket of roses tumbled to the ground, petals scattering like blood across the wet cobblestones. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice unusually tense. Alara shook her head, heart pounding, but the shock of being saved so suddenly left her breathless. I'm fine," she whispered, trying to steady herself. Lucian's hands remained on her arms, steady and firm, yet there was a softness in his touch she had not expected. "You should not walk these streets alone at night," he said, his voice low and commanding. "It is not safe for someone like you." I thought I could manage," she said, looking up at him. "I've walked these streets 1,000 times." "Experience does not protect you from fate," he said, "and tonight fate nearly took you." There was a quiet moment, heavy with unspoken words. Alara felt her pulse quicken at the nearness of him, at the raw strength and danger he radiated. Yet she also felt a strange warmth, a sense of being protected, even in the presence of someone so powerful and frightening. You always appear when I least expect it," she said softly, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. "I watch," he said simply, his gaze never leaving hers, "because something about you matters, more than I understand." Alara looked down at the scattered petals, realizing with a start that their lives were entwining in ways neither of them could fully control. The roses, symbols of life and love, had become a bridge between them, fragile yet unbreakable. In the days that followed, their encounters became more frequent, always charged with tension, curiosity, and a growing bond. They walked the streets together, careful to avoid prying eyes, and spoke in quiet tones about the city, life, and the strange paths that led them to one another. Lucian began to share small pieces of himself, glimpses of the man behind the power and fear. Alara listened, fascinated by the complexity of his world, the careful balance he maintained between darkness and control. She sensed his loneliness, the weight of responsibility he carried, and the curse that seemed to linger over him, a darkness he could not easily escape. And though she did not fully understand the nature of the curse, she felt it in his presence, in the way his eyes sometimes darkened when he thought no one was looking, in the way he avoided attachments, in the careful distance he kept even when drawn to her. Yet the connection between them only grew stronger. Alara's courage, honesty, and warmth touched a part of Lucian that had long been hidden. He found himself longing for her presence, for her laughter, for the light she brought into the shadowed halls of his life. One night, as they stood together on a balcony overlooking the rain-soaked city, Lucian spoke quietly. "You are not like anyone I have ever known," he said. "And yet, I fear what being near me will bring you. The world I live in, it is not kind to those who care." Alara looked at him, her heart swelling with both fear and determination. "I do not care about danger," she said softly. "I care about you, and I want to see who you truly are, even if it is frightening." Lucian's gaze softened, though it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken warnings. Perhaps that is the most dangerous thing of all. And so the bond between them deepened, silent, fragile, and charged with emotion. Each meeting, each glance, each word became a thread connecting their fates, weaving a tapestry of curiosity, longing, and tentative trust. But the world around them was not quiet. Shadows stirred in the alleys, whispers of enemies, curses, and secrets moving closer to them. And though they did not yet know it, the choices they made in the coming days would test their courage, their trust, and the strength of the fragile bond they had begun to form. Alara walked home that night with her basket empty, her mind full of questions and her heart full of strange hope. Lucian watched from his window, the shadows in the mansion deepening around him, yet his thoughts were only of her, the flower girl who had brought life into his dark world. Somewhere in the night, a soft breeze carried the scent of roses through the city, whispering a promise of connection, danger, and a story only just beginning. The city was a different world at night. Fog curled around the lamplights, hiding the cracks and alleys that hid danger and secrets. Alara walked with careful steps, her basket of roses swinging gently at her side. The streets were quieter than usual, yet every shadow seemed to move, and every distant noise carried a hint of menace. Since her encounters with Lucian, her life had changed. She was no longer a simple flower girl delivering messages and roses. She was drawn into a world she could barely understand, a world of power, darkness, and secrets that whispered in the corners of the city. Her heart often trembled at the thought of the man whose eyes haunted her dreams, but a strange courage kept her walking toward him, toward the mansion, and toward the unknown. Lucian, meanwhile, observed her from the shadows of his vast home. He had tried to resist the pull she created, the strange warmth she brought to his life, but it was futile. Each time she appeared, the shadows inside him stirred, breaking the careful control he had maintained for so many years. He was a man feared by all, yet her presence softened something inside him that he did not dare name. This night, however, was different. The city whispered of danger, and Lucian could feel it in the air, a tension that even his power could not ignore. Rumors of rival factions moving through the streets reached his ears, and he knew that someone had been watching Alara. Perhaps they had noticed her courage, her innocence, or perhaps they simply wished to hurt him through the one person who had dared to enter his life. Alara approached the mansion cautiously, carrying a small bouquet of midnight blue roses this time. She had chosen them for a reason she could not fully explain, a sense that they might appeal to Lucian in a way that crimson roses could not. The petals glimmered softly in the fog, each bloom almost alive with the subtle shimmer of dew. As she neared the mansion, the front gates creaked open silently. Lucian was already there, waiting in the shadows, his eyes sharp and alert. He did not smile. The soft moonlight outlined his features, highlighting the dangerous beauty of a man both feared and admired. "You should not be out here," he said, his voice low and firm, yet tinged with concern. "It is not safe." Alara looked up at him, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I am not afraid," she said softly. "I came because I wanted to see you." His eyes darkened, though not with anger. "You do not understand the world you are stepping into," he said. "There are forces here that would harm you without thought, and yet you come anyway." I do not know why," she admitted, "but I feel I must. Something draws me to you even if it is dangerous." Lucian's gaze softened slightly, and for a brief moment he seemed human rather than a man of power and shadows. "Perhaps that is your courage," he said. "Or perhaps it is curiosity, dangerous curiosity." They walked together into the mansion, the door closing behind them with a hollow echo. The hallways seemed alive, the shadows stretching and shifting as if they watched the two intruders moving through the space. Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear, but from the strange energy that pulsed through the mansion. It was as if the house itself were aware of them, aware of the bond growing between them. Lucian led her to the library, a vast room filled with ancient books and the faint scent of old wood and parchment. Candles flickered along the walls, casting dancing shadows. He gestured for her to sit, and she obeyed, feeling oddly at ease despite the tension in the air. "You do not know what you have entered," he said, pacing slowly. "My world is not kind to those who care, and yet here you are, walking freely among shadows that could destroy you." Ilara tilted her head, her fingers brushing over a dark blue rose she carried. "I do not care about shadows," she said softly. "I care about truth and about you." Lucian stopped pacing and looked at her sharply. "You speak as if you know me, but you know nothing," he said. "I am not a man to be understood easily. There is darkness here more than you can imagine." "I see the darkness," she said, her voice steady, "and I do not fear it. I only wish to see what lies beneath." A long silence followed. Lucian studied her, his mind torn between the desire to protect her and the desire to let her in. He had spent years building walls of fear, control, and solitude. And now she stood before him, asking to walk through those walls without hesitation. "Very well," he said finally, his voice low and almost reluctant. "If you wish to see the truth, then you will. But do not be surprised when it frightens you, and do not think that your courage will protect you from what is coming." Ilara nodded, her heart beating with both anticipation and fear. She did not fully understand what he meant, but she trusted him, even as the shadows in the room seemed to lean closer, listening. Over the next days, their bond deepened. Lucian allowed her into parts of his world she had never imagined. The secret halls, the hidden gardens, the library where books of strange power whispered of curses, old rivalries, and mystical forces. He did not explain everything, but she felt the weight of the unseen in every glance, every movement, every whispered word. She learned to read the mansion as she read the streets, noticing subtle details. The way shadows moved unnaturally, the faint hum of magic in certain rooms, the soft, almost imperceptible shifts in the air around him. And with every step, every discovery, she felt herself pulled closer to Lucian, her curiosity mingling with something far deeper. One evening, as rain fell softly against the windows, Lucian revealed a part of himself he had never shared with another human being. They sat in the candle-lit library, surrounded by the quiet of the night. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "There is a curse," he said, "a shadow that follows me, that punishes love, that destroys what I care for. I have lived with it for longer than I can remember, and I have learned. I must keep distance from those I feel for, no matter how strong the pull." Ilara's eyes widened, but she did not recoil. She placed a hand gently over the dark blue rose in her basket. "And yet I am here," she said softly. "I came anyway, perhaps because I believe in the good that exists beneath the darkness." Lucian studied her, his expression a mixture of awe, fear, and longing. "Most people would run," he said. "Most would see the danger and turn away. But you do not. You step forward into the unknown." "I do not step into danger blindly," she said. "I step because I trust and because I wish to understand, perhaps even to help." He shook his head slightly, though a faint smile touched his lips. "You are reckless," he said, "and yet you are brave, and for some reason I cannot resist your presence." Ilara's heart fluttered at his words, at the rare vulnerability in his tone. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to bridge the distance that existed between them. Yet she also felt the weight of his world, the darkness that followed him like a storm cloud. Before either could speak further, a sudden noise startled them, a shadow moving in the corner of the library, unnatural and sharp. Lucian's eyes darkened instantly, and he moved with speed and precision, placing himself between Alara and the threat. "It is nothing for you to worry about," he said, his voice calm but tense. "But be aware, the world outside these walls does not sleep, and those who wish to harm me will not hesitate to use those I care for." Alara nodded, understanding the warning. "I am not afraid," she said. I trust you to keep me safe, and I trust myself to stay strong." Lucian's gaze softened for just a moment, and he allowed himself to imagine a life where she could be safe, where the curse might not touch her, where he could perhaps embrace the connection forming between them. But the shadows outside the mansion were growing, and the city itself seemed to whisper warnings. Their bond, fragile and tentative, was beginning to draw attention, attention that could bring danger to them both. Later that night, as Alara walked home under the silver moonlight, she clutched the dark blue rose tightly. Her mind was full of thoughts of Lucian, the man, the curse, the mystery that surrounded him. She felt a strange exhilaration, knowing that their paths were now intertwined, and that the bond they shared was becoming stronger with each passing day. Somewhere in the mansion, Lucian watched from the window, his thoughts consumed by her. He did not know what the future held, or whether the darkness that followed him would destroy them both. But he knew one thing: he could not let her go. And so, the unseen bond between them grew stronger, fragile yet unbreakable, delicate yet powerful, a thread that tied their fates together, even as the shadows in the city stirred, and unseen forces moved closer to test the strength of their courage, trust, and connection. Night air was heavy with mist, curling along the streets like a living thing. Alara walked carefully, her basket of roses resting lightly against her arm, the petals trembling in the soft wind. Tonight was not like any other night. A storm was approaching, not just of rain but of fate. The city seemed to hold its breath, as though it sensed what was to come. Lucian stood on the balcony of his mansion, dark coat billowing around him like smoke. His eyes scanned the streets below, alert, restless. For days, he had felt the pull of the curse intensifying. Its shadow was no longer distant. It was moving closer, seeking to punish him, to test him. And now it seemed it had found Alara as well. He could not allow that. She was the first person who had entered his world without fear, the first person whose presence had softened the edges of his dark heart. And yet, the curse was cruel and relentless. He knew that to love, to truly allow connection, would put her in danger. But the thought of leaving her, of turning her away, was unbearable. The first sign came quietly, almost imperceptibly. A flicker of shadow moved at the edge of his vision, a chill that brushed the room like an unseen hand. Books shifted slightly on the shelves. Candles flickered. It was as though the mansion itself had sensed the danger, warning them. Alara approached the mansion with a determined heart. She had sensed that something was wrong, that the shadows had grown bolder, that the city was no longer safe. She did not fully understand the danger, but she had made her choice. She would face it with Lucian. The moment she entered, Lucian's expression softened, though the tension in the room remained. "You should not have come," he said, though his voice lacked anger. There was only concern, heavy and suffocating. "I cannot stay away," she said simply. "Not when I know you are in danger. We face this together." Lucian studied her for a long moment, torn between desire and caution. Finally, he nodded. "Then together we will face it," he said. "But know this: the curse does not forgive easily, and it does not yield to weakness." They moved through the mansion to the hidden library, where the old texts spoke of curses, rituals, and powers long forgotten. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and candle smoke. Lucian placed the dark blue roses in the center of the table. Their petals shimmered faintly, a subtle magic that Alara had begun to sense in recent days. "The curse binds me," Lucian explained, his voice low and intense. "It reacts to love, to connection, to trust. It punishes anyone who dares to care for me, and it grows stronger with each day." Alara listened intently, her fingers brushing over the petals. "Then we must face it together," she said. "I will not turn away, even if it is dangerous." Lucian looked at her, astonished at her courage. "You do not understand what you are saying. The curse could take you from me. It could destroy you." "I know," she said softly, "but I trust that together we can endure it. That trust is stronger than fear." He studied her closely, feeling the weight of her words, the truth of her courage. The shadows in the room seemed to pulse in response, moving as if alive. The mansion hummed with tension, and the air grew colder. "We must prepare a ritual," Lucian said finally. "A bond that will tie our fates together in a way that the curse cannot break. It is dangerous, and it will require courage from both of us." Alara nodded, her heart steady despite the fear that fluttered in her chest. "I am ready," she said, "with you." The ritual required focus, trust, and the petals of roses. Lucian instructed her to place the flowers in a circle on the floor, each bloom representing a fragment of their hearts. The room darkened as they worked, the only light coming from flickering candles. Shadows twisted along the walls, the presence of the curse pressing against them like a living force. Lucian took her hands in his, their fingers entwining. The warmth of his touch spread through her like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Are you certain?" he asked. His gaze was intense, almost desperate. "I am," she said firmly. "I trust you, I trust us." He drew a deep breath, closing his eyes. The shadows in the room grew darker, curling toward them, testing their resolve. A cold wind swept through the library, flicking candles and scattering petals slightly, but neither Alara nor Lucian faltered. Their connection held, steady and unbroken. Lucian whispered an ancient incantation, words that felt like the breath of the city itself. Alara repeated them alongside him, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each syllable. The air around them seemed to hum with power, and the shadows recoiled, sensing the force of the bond forming. The room filled with a brilliant, soft light as the ritual reached its peak. The petals of the roses shimmered and lifted slightly, spinning around them like a gentle storm. The curse reacted violently, sending gusts of wind and ripples through the air, trying to break their focus, trying to drive fear into their hearts. Lucian's grip on Alara tightened. "Do not falter," he said. "Trust in me, trust in us." Alara closed her eyes, focusing only on the bond they shared, the courage they held together, and the warmth of his presence. "We are stronger than fear," she whispered. The shadows screamed silently, twisting and writhing, but the light of their connection shone brighter. The curse recoiled, a force pushing against their determination, but it could not break the bond they had formed. Slowly, the shadows retreated to the corners of the room, unable to penetrate the strength of their courage and trust. When the light faded, the room was calm again. The petals of the roses lay still on the floor, glowing faintly as though content. Lucian opened his eyes, and for the first time in years, he smiled. Not the rare, guarded smile he wore for the world, but a true, human smile that reached deep into his eyes. Alara felt her heart swell, her chest tightening with relief and joy. "We did it," she whispered, almost in awe. Lucian nodded, his gaze soft and warm. "Yes, together. The curse is no longer free to harm us." He paused, studying her with a tenderness he had never allowed himself to show. "And yet we are changed, scarred perhaps, but stronger than before." Alara smiled, reaching out to touch his cheek gently. "We faced it together. And I will always face it with you." For a moment, the city outside the mansion seemed to pause, holding its breath in quiet respect for the bond that had been forged. The storm had passed, leaving a soft, silver glow across the rooftops. The shadows remained as they always would, but they no longer threatened to destroy what had been built between them. Lucian's hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally. "Perhaps," he said softly, The wrong door did not bring you to me by accident. Perhaps it brought you here for this. Alara's eyes sparkled in the candlelight. Perhaps, she echoed, and perhaps the shadows will always remind us how precious the light is. They stood together in the library, the petals of the roses glowing faintly around them. The mansion was quiet, yet it felt alive, aware of the connection that now pulsed within its walls. Lucian felt something he had not felt in years: hope, warmth, and the faintest sense of freedom from the darkness that had bound him for so long. Outside, the city continued its restless life. Shadows still lurked and danger would always exist. But within the mansion, within the bond that had been forged through courage, trust, and love, there was safety, strength, and the promise of something new. Alara rested her head lightly against Lucian's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Do you think we will be okay?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with both relief and lingering fear. Lucian pressed his hand gently to hers, a rare softness in his gaze. "We will be more than okay," he said. "We have faced the darkness together. Whatever comes next, we will face it as one." And for the first time, the shadows in the mansion seemed less threatening, less alive. They were still there, lurking at the edges, reminders of the past, but powerless against the bond that had been forged in courage and trust. Lucian finally allowed himself to smile fully, a true, human smile. Alara's hand rested in his, her heart full of a hope she had never dared to feel before. Together, they had faced the curse, the shadows, and the fears that had threatened to separate them. And together they had emerged stronger, bound not just by circumstance, but by choice, courage, and a deep, enduring trust. Outside, the city remained mysterious and dangerous, but within the mansion there was light and there was hope. And in that quiet, sacred moment, Alara and Lucian knew that no shadow, no curse, and no danger could ever break the bond they had chosen to create.